Okay, so Happy New Year. Welcome to the first meetup of the seventh year of our journey. Can't believe it's 7 years since I co-created this meetup. I worked with my friends Victor and Fred in October 2014 in this Barnes and Noble in Dallas. That's where we created it. The San Francisco, whatever their team is it the Giants? Whatever the baseball team is, they won the World Series. I found out last time that they beat the Texas Rangers. So this is probably not a good example to have over here, but I'll fix it if I come up with a better idea. So as many of our old timers know, regular attendees know, we use this meetup to explore the interconnections between Agile and DevOps. We have 2 events a month. This one, first Thursday at 6 p.m. Central, and then the third Thursday at noon. So this helps us get attendees from India, from Asia, and from Europe as well. Try to do Agile and DevOps, technical, non-technical topics. I love getting speakers on more technical topics like the one we have today. Technical is relative, but typically our topics are mostly around coaching and process and so on. And I love to get more technical speakers like we have today. All right. All of our recordings are going to be available on our YouTube channel. So if you want to share, you attend this meetup, you think it's valuable for a friend or a colleague, all you have to do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. You'll get notified once we upload the video and you can share it. Also, we've got all of our previous webinars recorded, so you may find something valuable for you there. All right. A few announcements about things I'm passionate about. So I'm the co-founder of a nonprofit called Agile for Patriots. And what we do in this nonprofit is that we provide free Agile training, coaching, and mentoring and practical experience to US military veterans and their spouses. So far we have graduated 6 cohorts, 42 graduates over 3 years. And this year, our next cohort will launch in around, I think it's going to be in May. And you can just see some of the people whose lives I think we have made a difference to. These are people who have sacrificed for our country. This is, as an immigrant, I feel a debt to them. And so this is my way of trying to pay back a small installment of my debt. If that's something that calls you, I would love your help. How can you help give back and appreciate our military families? We have a bi-weekly session for our graduates. If you have valuable knowledge and experience, our graduates would love for you to join one of these sessions. You don't have to make any slides, just show up. And then they will ask you questions that will help them either do well in an interview and get a job, or it will help them succeed in the job that they already have. If you are intimidated with the idea of a 30-minute conversation, you can just show up for a 5 or 7-minute lightning talk. You can make some presentations. If you like, you can consider our graduates for internships and job opportunities. Or you can make a donation. So you just go to agileforpatriots.org and you just click on the donate button. It's secured through PayPal. So anyway, if you want to give back, this could be a great way for you if it calls you. Let me tell you a little bit about my company. My company, Smooth Apps, helps with Agile training, coaching, consulting. We have partners throughout the world. So if you have clients who are geographically distributed, we have partnered with 340 Scrum.org professional Scrum trainers. Chances are, no matter where your team is, I can find a trustworthy and reliable partner who can work with me to provide Agile training, coaching, consulting, and transformation services. Some of the bundles or packages that we offer are, we do executive coaching. We realize that a lot of Agile enablement fails because executives are misaligned. So we have a bundle for executive alignment. Second biggest reason for failure of Agile is product owners are misaligned or they're not skilled at Agile product management. So we have a boot camp. We also help reboot and launch teams. And finally, we do soup to nuts Agile enablement or Agile transformation. So that's just a glimpse of the kind of work we do. If you need some help, or if you're curious about whether we can help you, contact me on LinkedIn or through our contact us page. I'd be happy to talk to you. If you don't have money, but you want to learn from us, got plenty of free content. Look at our blogs, look at our free videos on YouTube. We've got free presentations. You can see our webinars, join this meetup, follow us on LinkedIn. So lots of free content so that you can learn at your own pace. All right, let's talk about logistics. Everyone's going to be in listen only mode. I'm going to be monitoring your comments, and your questions. You can interact with me and Talia through the chat panel or the Q&A panel. We're going to hold all questions and comments until the end. And at the end, that's when I will start sharing your questions, and then Talia will do her best to answer them. If we run out of time, maybe you can contact Talia offline, and if her schedule, allows, she will do her best to answer your questions. All right. So with that, I want to stop sharing, and I want to welcome Talia. Happy New Year, Talia. Welcome. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with our community. And I will stop sharing, and then please start sharing and take it away.
Cool. Thank you for having me. Ravi, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So we're going to talk about testing in production today. It's something that I will not shut up about. It's something that I'm so passionate about and that I've been talking about for a really long time. And so at the end, if you guys have questions, I'm so happy to answer them. But let's get started. So I'm Talia. I'm a developer advocate at a company called Split Software. And what being a developer advocate means that I get to interact with developers and product people and data scientists, and I get to speak at conferences and meetups and meet people with different roles in different agile and scrum and waterfall positions. And we talk about, testing practices, we talk about feature flagging, we talk about experimentation, and Split is kind of what brings all of that together. But before I was a developer advocate, I was an engineer. I was a test engineer for 5 years, and I did automation and QA, and I tested all the things. And being a test engineer was really hard because a lot of the problems that I had revolved around staging. So any product person or any engineer will tell you that most companies use a staging environment to test their code, to test their functionality, and obviously staging isn't the same as production. So staging leads to so many issues, and these are some of the problems that I dealt with, that if you guys use staging environments, which I'm sure you do, I'm sure you guys have had some of these problems too. So the first problem is having a data mismatch. So the data in staging does not match the data in production, which means that the test results don't always match. So I used to work so hard on testing every single product requirement. I would go through the documentation with the product owner, and I worked with my developers to fix all the bugs, and I would make sure all of my end-to-end tests were passing. I would sign off on the feature, and as soon as it's launched to production, there would be a bug. So it's such a horrible feeling when you're like responsible for this feature as either an engineer or a scrum master or whatever your role is, you're responsible for getting this feature out. And there's all this pressure on you to make sure that it works in a dummy environment. The second thing is configuration drift. So let's say you get paged one night because there's an incident for your mobile app, and you look at the logs and you identify what the problem is, but in order to fix it, you have to update a specific configuration in production. So you make the change in production and then you go back to sleep because it's the middle of the night. And although you fixed the issue, you just created an even bigger divide between your staging and your production environments because you didn't make the same change in your staging environment. So many times staging environments are not the same as production because of changes made during incident management, and this is called configuration drift. So what's the point of testing and staging if it's not going to give me the same results as production? Why do I need this dummy environment? There's also very bad performance in staging. For those of you who've ever logged into a test environment or a QA environment to test some sort of functionality, you know that it's very, very slow. So when you're writing tests in staging, you often have to make them work a little bit different because of the bad performance that you have. And nobody cares if staging is down. So I would be assigned to test these hotfix tickets, which were just critical bug fixes that needed to be immediately released to production. So I would log into staging to test it, but staging would be down. So I pinged the DevOps guy and he tells me they're doing performance testing and staging. So I have to wait until that's done. And then I try logging in again. And this time I get the 404 screen of death. So I open an IT ticket and then I have to get it escalated by my manager, but she's at lunch, so I have to ping someone else. And it's just literally this whole process. And all I'm trying to do is test this high priority ticket and nobody seems to care. So nobody's going to get a call in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner if staging is down. And I was so fed up with dealing with such a horrible testing experience and such a horrible release experience, and being blamed for when things didn't work in production. And I thought there has to be a better way to test and release software. My end users are not going to log into staging to use my application. They're going to log into production. So I did a ton of homework and I researched what other companies are doing. And this is what I learned. So first off, it's the norm for companies to use staging environments. So especially companies that are still waterfall, many of them still use staging environments. And not only that, they use multiple staging environments. So some companies that I've worked at have had a staging environment for each day of the week. Some companies have a staging environment for each release. I worked with a company a while ago that had a staging environment, a QA environment, and then a beta environment, and then a test environment, and then a pre-prod. It was just one after another after another. And there are companies, big name companies like Google and Facebook and Netflix and Twitter, and they all test in production. And when I read test in production for the first time, I was so confused. I was like, what does this mean? How is this possible? And I learned that testing in production means testing your features in the environment that your features will live in. So not using a dummy environment like staging or a QA or a test environment or something like that. And I thought, oh my God, this is perfect. And this solves all of my problems. And I also learned that testing in prod doesn't mean you only test in prod. So you can still use staging for your GDPR and SOX related data and privacy issues. And I thought I have to start doing this. This is such a great process. And the things that I can't test in production or that legal won't let me test in production, I can still use staging for. And I thought I have to start doing this. So how is this possible? And the answer was feature flags. And a feature flag is a way to separate code deployment from feature release. So the idea here is you deploy your code to production behind a feature flag, you test it in production, and then you release the feature with a click of a button as soon as it's bug-free. So this is kind of what it looks like, and I'm going to explain this diagram a little. So our developers would create a feature flag from the UI, and which this is kind of a version of what it looks like in Split. And then you target all of your internal teammates. And what this does is it means that only the people that you target, so in this case, it's devs, testers, product design, everyone who's in the feature flag, they're the only ones who can see anything related to the feature. So right now, the people who are on the right, these end users, they're not going to see anything related to the feature because they're not in the feature flag. And you can see right now the flag is off, the toggle is off. So only the people who are targeted have access and can see the changes that are associated with this feature. So while the feature flag is off, you go in and you test everything. So you test all of your functionality, you test all of your design, you go through all of the requirements, you make sure everything works. And if you happen to find a bug in your new feature, it has zero impact on your end users because they don't have access to it. They're not targeted in your flag, and it has zero impact for them. And then once you know that your feature is working in production, you turn on the flag, already knowing 100% that your features are working in production and you didn't break anything that was existing. And now your users are happy and they're dancing because you released a perfect feature. And I thought, you can't possibly manually test every feature every time you release. And with feature flags, there's this added complexity. So how do you automate it? Automation is like a really big part of successful releases. And so there's two options for automation. The first option is that you target your test users and automate the flows with them. So what this means is if you go in here, back to this diagram, you would target, let's say, automation bot 1. And automation bot 1 for this feature flag is going to be targeted. So that means every time automation bot 1 logs into your application, they're going to see this feature. They can interact with the feature. You can write a test so that that bot clicks on whatever it needs to, performs the test, and expect something to happen with that bot. The only problem with this is that there is increased fragility. So if someone removes that bot from the feature flag, then your tests are going to fail. So you just have to make sure if you do go with this approach that nobody removes that bot from the feature flag. The next option you have is to make a custom feature flag abstraction. So what this means is that you override your feature flags for the state of the duration of the test. So basically for each feature, you have 3 tests. And in the first test, you simulate the feature flag on. In the second test, you simulate the feature flag off. And in the third test, you just make sure that the feature works regardless of if the flag is on or off. And this is generally the approach that we recommend just because it doesn't rely on any fragility or anything else that can happen with your feature flag. And then when you run these tests in production, you want to make sure that your tests only interact with other testing entities, right? A lot of people, when you say testing in production, they get scared, they get, you know, there's a lot of negativity surrounding it. And I think one of the main things is that you don't want to affect real people and real users in production, right? So you want to make sure that your tests only interact with other testing entities in production. And the way you do that is you have a back-end flagging system. So something that works really well for me is you say something like, you have a Boolean or something in the back end that identifies each test object as is test equals true. And this can just be an ARIA label or some kind of data attribute that you attach to each object, each test object. And you can say is test equals true for the test object and is test equals false for the real objects. And then you can separate your test data from real data in your data dashboard. So if you're using Datadog or Looker or a Split, wherever you're collecting your data, you can see all of these runs, all of this data coming in with is test equals true. This is all my test data, and all of my data coming in with is test equals false. This is all my real production data. And the tests, they're looking for specific elements with these specific test attributes in production. And if they don't find it, the test is going to fail and you're going to get alerted. But there are exceptions. If your software is integrated with a third party, it can be tricky to test. So something that works for me is you create a unique header in the API request that you send to the third party and say, hey, any request you get with this header is a test, and I want you to treat it this other way. So there are exceptions. Sometimes you have to work around things when you're testing in production, but if you want to make it work, you can make it work. And third parties should not be a blocker at all. And then a big question I get all the time is like, how do you know what to test in production? the two things that I would point to are your product person and your data person. So your product person is going to tell you from a business perspective, what are the most important flows for us to test in production? So what gives us the most business value? And then your data analyst is going to say, this is what people are doing the most in our application. This is what is giving us the most traffic. This is what the data is pointing to. So between those, you should have a really good idea of what is the most important and like where to start testing in prod. I'm just gonna skip this slide. Okay, and then besides feature flags, there's some dependencies that you need. So these dependencies are an automation framework. So again, you don't want to manually run every single test every time you deploy. You want to have these tests automated and do them with one of the two options that I recommended earlier. You want to have a job scheduler, so something that's going to run your tests for you incrementally. It could be nightly for some tests, it could be hourly for the really important tests, it could be with every build. You can configure these however you like. And then you also need an alerting tool. So when a test fails, you need to get alerted so that you can figure out what's going on. And these are the recommended tools that I have used for testing in prod. So obviously for feature flagging, we recommend Split. For an automation framework, my absolute favorite automation framework is Robot. It's a keyword-driven framework that requires pretty much zero coding. And it's super easy to use and it integrates well with your job scheduler. You can use, I've used Cypress too, which is really great. I'm actually wearing a Cypress shirt. Not sponsored or anything by them, but I've used Cypress before. And then for a job scheduler, I have zero preference between Jenkins and Circle CI, Travis, Maven, they're all the same to me. And then alerting, PagerDuty, Slack. You can also set up alerts inside of Split to get when your metrics are acting funny and you want to get alerted. Okay, so this process of testing in production, it made, when I first heard about it, it made total sense to me. And as I started implementing it and as I started working in this new world, I thought, wow, this is so great. This is such an amazing process and it's so beneficial. But why isn't everyone testing in production? Why do staging environments even exist? Why do people still test in QA environments if you have this process that solves all of your problems? And the reason is people are scared. Companies don't test in production because of this fear and this lack of trust in their systems. And for the same reason, they refuse to engage in the tools and the process changes that are going to generate that trust. So they're too afraid of the risks. And so let's go through some of the risks. There's a few things you can do to mitigate the risks of testing in prod. So one of the things we talked about was using feature flags before you launch to your audience. So again, target your internal teammates, test with your internal teammates so that only they can see the feature and interact with the feature, and then turn on the feature flag already knowing that your feature works and you didn't break anything that was existing. You can also use a canary release. You should also use a canary release. And a canary release is a percentage rollout. And this allows you to release your features to a small subset of users before you release it to your entire user base. So if something goes wrong, would you want 100% of your users to encounter this issue or 1%? So this just gives you like that extra layer of protection. And it's also a good idea to start with an AA test when you're using feature flags. So what this means is you give both sets of users inside and outside of the feature flag the same experience and just make sure that the data coming in is the same for both. And this again is going to build your confidence with the feature flagging system. And then again, start small. You don't want to start out with the most complex flow and the flow that hits every single service and say, I want to test this in production. You want to start out small, start with something simple, and then work your way up to those flows that you worked with your product person and your data person to work out. And the outcome of testing in prod, there's a few things that happen when you start testing in production. So the biggest one is that you release faster. You're not tied to a specific release night, right? So you can push a button and release the feature whenever you want. I know, like back in the day, in the early stages of software development, you had to gather all the new code and like ritualistically release at one time. But with feature flags, you deploy your code behind the feature flag, test it internally, and then release when the feature is ready. And then you also have increased developer velocity because your developers spend more time creating new features and less time fixing bugs. You also have an increased confidence in your releases because everybody on the team knows that the features are working in production in the environment that they will live in, not in a dummy environment. And obviously, all of this makes the team really happy because there's no surprises. And if I haven't convinced you that this is a good idea, I just want everyone to think of the last feature that your team deployed. So everyone, I'll give you like 5 seconds to think about what's the last feature that your team released to production. Is it working right now in production? How do you know? Your users haven't reported anything to you, your alarms haven't gone off. So yeah, you assume that it's working, right? But you don't know. Testing in production is the only way to know that your features are working right now in production. And oftentimes shifting your company's testing culture is the hardest part of this process. So just getting over that fear is a really big part of the process. So 2 things that you can do in addition to all of the steps we talked about for risk mitigation, use examples from your past. So is your staging environment unreliable? I can tell you for a fact, yes, it is. And then start using feature flags. If you go to split.io, you can create a free account and just start implementing feature flags. There really isn't much code or coding experience needed. So anyone can really go in and start using feature flags. We also have a ton of tutorials, and I write a lot of blog posts and create a lot of content around this. It's something I'm pretty passionate about. So just head to split.io and you can check out some of that content. You can sign up for feature flags. We can walk through some tutorials. And in case you have not been paying attention at all for the past 30 minutes, I want you to take away 2 things. The first is that nobody cares if your features are working in staging. We care if they work in production. And the only way to know if it's working in prod is to test it in prod. I also just want to note that we are hiring. If you go to split.io/careers, you can look at some of our open jobs. And this is my contact info. This is my Twitter. You feel free to email me, feel free to contact me. I'm happy to answer questions now. But that's all I have for everybody.
All right, Talia, that was amazing. My absolute terror is testing in production. And we're developing a new product. And the most embarrassing thing that happened to me was I attended a sprint review and my team just showed me an amazing feature. And I'm trying to get funding and I showed it to an investor and I got some 303 or some God knows what error. Now, I was stupid. I should have tested it first, right? But I made that assumption that what I saw in the sprint review got moved over to production and it hadn't.
Yeah.
And so this is very embarrassing and it's very close. It hits close to my heart. It's a recent wound that is not yet healed. But I'm also terrified, Talia, because as you mentioned, I have that fear, right? Many of my clients, like I have a client which is a fintech client, they deal with billions. I'm talking about hundreds of billions of dollars of data, money. And some of my clients have gigabytes of data. So the fear that's in my mind is, imagine we are testing in production and that there's billions of dollars going through our system. how might I, what would just be some low-level operational steps that someone would follow to create some kind of a mirror? Do they create a mirror image or a snapshot of that production data into a test data, and that's what the test object is working on? Or can you tell me a little bit about that?
So you can replicate all of the objects you need and make them test objects and label them in the way that you need to. You can also, I think this answers the question from Aditya in the chat too. If it's really impossible for you to test in production, or it's really going to cause some GDPR, SOX, whatever regulatory privacy issues, you can spin up containerized environments. You can use Docker or Kubernetes or whatever service, and you can use those to spin up environments and test your code there. So what that does is it creates a copy of production. So it's not production, but it's kind of as close to production as you can get. So I would say if you absolutely cannot test in production, then I would spin up a containerized environment and do that per build.
So how do we, so the moment you take a snapshot, I'm assuming that there is some kind of a drift, right? Because now real customers are using the real production data. So now the moment you took the snapshot, maybe a second later, the snapshot became outdated because now people are executing tests in that copy of that production data. And now that copied data is now going through a different journey, and the real data is going through a different journey. And now they're getting out of sync. I'm
not sure I understand. The copy that you make in a containerized environment, that's where you would put your testing objects, and that's where you would run your tests in production. If you can't hit production directly, you can create a containerized environment and test your code there, like through Docker.
Got it. All right, very good. Thank you. I've got a bunch of questions. One question is, one is from Suresh. Let me read out all the questions, Talia, and then you can answer them in whatever order makes sense. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
All right. So Suresh has a bunch of questions. One is, how do testers get aligned with incident production issues? Aditya's question is, unfortunately, yeah, regulatory authorities need to certify my release. So I can't release or test in production. What do you recommend for highly regulated industries and products? Another question from Suresh is, manual testing delays CI/CD and velocity. Do you have any suggestions? And another question is ETL. I'm working in an ETL-based project. We don't have a separate staging environment. I'm testing everything in production because of data restrictions. And do we need a separate data flow for this approach, like separate output for non-prod testing? Okay, so a whole bunch of questions. Where should we start, Talia?
Okay, so how do testers get aligned with production incidents? So if you're not testing in production, you're going to have a lot of production incidents. That was my case because of the differences in staging and production. So I would say like testing in production kind of drastically reduces the number of those production incidences. So yeah, I would just say like test in production, use feature flags. I think that answers that question. And then manual testing delays the CI/CD velocity. How can we cover that? I think just try to automate as much as you can. Robot framework, please look into it. You don't need to be able to write any code to use robot framework. It's a keyword driven library. And it's one that I highly recommend and that I've used with testing in production. So that will increase your velocity. Another thing that will increase the velocity, again, is using feature flags and using that toggle to turn your features on and off whenever you want. And I've actually never worked in an ETL-based project, but I'm assuming if you don't have a separate staging environment that you are testing in production now, and you have to take some, extra steps to make sure that you're testing safely. Cool, I think. Are there any other questions? Do you have a definition what testing has to be done in what environment, like user testing, regression testing? Okay, so in like a true testing in production environment, like everything is done in production, and then you can use staging for, you know, those regulatory and, you know, GDPR, SOX compliant, privacy, all of those issues. You can run those tests in staging, but for the most part, everything should be done in production. And those few things that, you know, your legal team or, you know, people say that you absolutely cannot test in production, then those can be in your staging environment. But in terms of the different types of tests, there's no distinction.
Okay. Talia, if somebody wanted to take the first step and either watch like go through a tutorial, a blog, or a video, where would one start? And would the answer vary based on the tech stack that the person is using?
Okay, so the first thing you would do is go to split.io, click create a free account, and you can walk through the setup. We have tutorials on our blog. I would just suggest like going through the blog and finding, we have a ton of SDKs also in our documentation. If you just Google split.io SDK documentation, you'll be able to find any SDK that we have. So yeah, I would say go to split.io and create a free account.
All right, so I'm at split.io, and the tutorials, this is the SDK.
Yeah, so I would go up one to documentation, and that's where you have the documentation for every SDK. And then, yeah, so on the right, you can just click on any SDK, or sorry, on the left.
Yeah.
Yep.
Very cool. All right. Very cool. Okay. Good. And then in terms of the tool set that you mentioned that for automation, you recommended people look at robot.
Yeah,
right?
robot framework. Yeah.
All right. So let me see. That's this one. Am I in the right place?
Yep. This is it.
Cool. All right. Good. And then any other, I know that you showed us a whole bunch of tools in your slide, the reference slide. Are there any other tools that you would recommend as the first place people go to try out your ideas?
No, I think like just the biggest one with the biggest functionality is Split, because that's like what really is the foundation for feature flagging. And without feature flagging, you can't test in production. So I would say first go through Split and go through some of the tutorials we have and go through our blog. And you know, you can create a free account and start from there.
Perfect. All right. And then we are, Talia's slides are available on this link. So I'm going to post this link to all the attendees. You can access these slides, and then I will likely also post this as a message on the Meetup message board, and possibly in the YouTube video abstract as well. What other questions do you folks have? Let me see. What's the most valuable thing you folks have learned as a result of this? And what is one action you would take? Oh, actually, there's one more question. Sorry. I'm sorry if you discussed this. What workflow would you suggest for testing in production while using Splunk or Nagios for monitoring? I'm sorry if I didn't, if I was distracted and you answered this.
Yeah, so I've used Splunk before for monitoring, and right now what you can do is you can set up your tests and have the data come back through Splunk, and that way you can see That way you can see if something goes wrong, like who did it, when was it, what data did they submit, and you can also do the same thing through Split. Yeah, so I think that answers that question. Can you summarize the title again? So that testing in production just means testing your features in the environment that your features will live in and not using a dummy environment.
Cool. Talia, a somewhat different question. Imagine that I'm starting a new product and I have like carte blanche. I can choose any tech stack that I want. Are there any particular tech stacks that you would recommend people consider before others that are more compatible or conducive to this kind of testing in production?
No. you can add Split to most tech stacks. I would say just look at our SDKs before you start implementing, but we have most of the SDKs available.
Got it. And I know you work for Split. I'm sure this is you believe in the product, but are there other products, competing products, and what are the differentiators? When would you, if you were to take an objective look at the pros and cons of different competing products, what is it that makes Split different, and what might be some situations where someone might consider a competitor?
Yeah, so there are competitors. We have LaunchDarkly as a competitor, CloudBees, Optimizely, and I think what differentiates Split is a couple of things. So one is our focus on developer experience. So we have, like I said, a lot of code tutorials and blog posts, and we have a lot of content that teaches developers how to use our product. So we really want to make sure that the developers have the best experience. The next thing is we have a lot of integrations. So, we have mParticle and Google Analytics, and, the list goes on and on, but we have so many integrations that make it, easy to use and just really valuable. Yeah, so, I can talk about Split forever,
Yeah.
but we have a question that says, is this approach recommended in large Fortune 500 companies? Absolutely. Google, Facebook, Netflix, Twitter, like they all implement testing in production. So a lot of companies will start to create their own feature flags and their own feature flag management system, and then they'll come to us because it's just a lot of overhead. So we kind of solve all of those problems, and we have like data and metrics like implemented for you already. So yeah.
All right. Okay. So we are approaching the end of our time together. I'd love to get a few responses to my question. What's the biggest takeaway you got from this session? And if there was only one thing that you did, one action you took as a result of this session to improve testing in your company, what would it be?
I think people are shy.
People are thinking. I think I know what I would do. I'm going to share this. I know, we are painfully aware because of the recent debacle of the need to improve in this area. So I'm going to share this with my team. I love your dog. What's your dog's name?
Oh, this is Teddy. He's needy.
Yeah, hi Teddy. I've got my dog Mishti. She's next to me. She's like an extension of my body. She always has to be close to me, and I feel incomplete without her. So she's next to me as well. All right, we are starting to get some answers. So Aditya is saying, I would support test specialists who had trouble setting up tests in production. Steve says, move slowly in implementing testing in production. Suresh says, will apply in the Salesforce area. Nitendra said, I had to do a lot of extra work for testing in production. Yeah. So cool. I hope that you got some new ideas. And the thing with cultural change and changing long habits that have been established and ingrained over years or decades, it's about planting a seed. And many times what I have found in my line of work is I may plant a seed on one day and it gets shot down because that's part of our evolutionary response. New ideas can come across as threats to our existence. So that's how Mother Nature programmed us, that whenever a new idea comes in, we project all our fears and anxieties on that new idea. So we shoot down new ideas. But what I have learned is the path of being an evangelist, a change agent. It is painful. You fail more often than you succeed. But when that seed bears fruit, when it germinates, that is a beautiful feeling, especially if you created a tree that will feed many generations. So don't get disheartened. If you got energized in this session and you go full of energy and you share this idea with your colleagues and they crap all over it, you just never know. Sometimes I've been so pleasantly surprised. The person who attacked that idea the most violently becomes an evangelist a few days, weeks, or months, or years later. And they use my words, and they may have forgotten that the words that they are saying come from that moment when I planted that seed. And it doesn't matter, because if it's their idea, it will live longer than if they remember it's my idea. So those are my closing thoughts. Talia, thank you so much for making time and for kicking off the new year with such a big bang. I hope that we get a chance to have you back as a speaker later on in the year. And I hope everybody enjoyed this. If you have questions, maybe give Talia a shout out or connect with her on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed it, give her a shout out on LinkedIn so other people can also benefit from her wisdom. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay happy, keep calm. Thank you, and scrum on.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.